Hello, all, and welcome to Education and Educational Inequality. So, we're jumping right in. What is education? What do we learn from education? You probably see a dog tail in the back. So, sorry for that interruption. So, education. It's where we go outside of the home to learn values and norms. And education is a continuation of norms from our family of origin. They're typically similar, though again, like we talked about, that sometimes those norms can be different than what we learn at home, but typically they reinforce the norms of society. So education is a social process that involves role expectations. So there's role expectations in student-teacher roles. And what behavior is expected if you are a teacher, what behavior is expected if you are a student. So typically if you are a student, that you do your homework and you turn your stuff in on time, and if we were in a class, you would probably raise your hand and say, hey Haley, I have a question. Or you wouldn't just stand up and say, this is terrible, and I'm leaving, right? That wouldn't be not only would that be not very nice, but it's not normal in our society. On the flip side of that, being a teacher is I typically show up prepared, professional. I should get your things graded on time. I should deliver something to where by the time that you go to the test, you're not sitting there thinking, I've never learned this before. We are impersonal with student and teacher relations, back to that impersonality within bureaucracy. So, education has several different pockets, if you will, that fill in, that we will see. One, starting off with credentialism, that make up what education is. So credentialism, it's social or economic requirement that a person holds, that is an advantage. So an example of this would be holding a degree as a condition for a job. So you cannot be a instructor or a PhD professor at a university or college unless you have your master's or your PhD. So, credentialism assumes that obtaining a degree, that obtaining a degree guarantees a certain level of work ethic. So, people assume that if you have a degree and you went to college, that you somehow should get this job because it assumes that you have a certain work ethic and that you're able to do the things that the job requires. So, question for you guys. Do you think that having a degree, 100%, I can't even say 100% because that could be falsified pretty quickly. Just in general, do you think a degree is a demarcator of work ethic? No, it's not. But credentialism is an advantage that someone holds due to some type of requirement that they have met. Mainstreaming. So mainstreaming is a concept in public schools. So this is typically a process where students who have special needs, typically not special needs that are really, really advanced, but special needs where people can still be introduced to typical classrooms, not normal classrooms, but typical classrooms. Okay, so mainstreaming, the concept with this is that isolating students due to difference removes them completely from the social condition, and this is what schools do not want. Schools want the least restrictive environment as possible. Okay, so mainstreaming is it's bringing everyone together that can be together and introducing them to typical classrooms, not normal, but typical classrooms. So minimum competency tests. So I grew up in Oklahoma, but I also lived a bit in Texas whenever I was young, and we took the TOX test, whatever it's called. So for those of you in Texas are probably like, oh my gosh, this is what it's called. So for those of you from Texas can say that word with me, but it's this minimum, I think I took one or two of them. And at the end of the year, I'm sure as you all know, you go through and you fill in little bubbles, and they bring milk and granola bars, and I remember peppermints, right? And you take tests all day and they say, awesome, you can move on to the third grade or whatever it may be. So minimum competency tests are those specific standardized tests that measure basic skills that say you are good to move on, or maybe you're not so good to move on. So along with that is tracking. So tracking is based off of those competency tests and scores of the student from those tests, right? So you're going to track, you're going to put together kind of like the books are in order, right? Like who scored the highest and who scored the lowest and everybody in between. So children or students are then categorized based on their performance and placed accordingly to their specific learning styles. So an example of this is after my tests, they said just don't go to a high level math. You like stay in the lowest math as possible. But reading and writing and humanities, which is shockingly, I'm in a humanities or liberal arts degree. I was in AP. So based upon what the child gets, they're placed accordingly in specific learning structures. So what do you guys think could be an issue with this? Do you think that this is an advantage? And along with that question, which one do you think outweighs the other? So is there an issue with taking a standardized test and saying, okay, this person needs to be here, here, and here, and here, with a very impersonal, not knowing maybe it was a bad day, maybe they don't test well, but they really do a good job and don't need to be held back. And also what could be a possible advantage. So that's kind of something to think about. But tracking, again, it's just taking those tests and placing people based upon a number and outcome of the exam or the test. Okay, social promotion. Look at those adorable little kindergartners. So social promotion is moving students based upon age. So you're done with kindergarten and you put on a little hat and you walk across a cute little stage with your cute little gown and robe and you move the little tassel over and it's adorable and it's an accomplishment because of your age. Because you graduated from kindergarten and you're 5 to 6 or 6 to 7, whatever those ages are. Along with social promotion, here's the problem. Retaining kids can cause an issue. So if the kid maybe didn't do as well in kindergarten, if the student didn't do as well in kindergarten, they may say, well, we're going to leave that child behind. However, there can be some big issues developmentally, emotionally, socio-emotionally if a child is left behind. The thing that I think about in my head is, what is that Adam Sandler movie where Billy Madison, I think it is, where he goes back to school, right? This is an wildly exaggerated situation, but he's out of place because he's older and he's in a class with younger people. Now, that doesn't happen, and that doesn't mean that everybody that is held back, that's what happens. But the point of social promotion is that if we can, we're going to move you along with your peers as much as possible. So, again, the process of moving students forward for the sake of moving them forward without the actual regard to their ability. So, a functionalist view of education. A functionalist view of education says that education, much like what a functionalist says, is that education creates stability, creates social stability, and it creates cohesion. It creates social cohesion. It creates social order. Well, how does it do that? So, education transmits social information, this cherished social traditions. How many of you all raise your hand if you guys did the little Valentine's Day thing where you all brought candy and a little Valentine's Day card at Valentine's Day and you put them in the little shoe boxes? Did y'all do that? Well, if you didn't, I know a lot of people that did. Point here is that education transmits all of this information from what we should do, what we should be, how we should act, what we should learn, and it transmits it across all of our culture. So think again through the things that you've learned throughout your school years. So those things are culturally relevant and they're culturally reinforced. Per a functionalist view of education, here's 6 ways that education is functional in society. So I will go into each detail of each one in further depth, but just to name off the 6 really quickly. So education is functional in society as it transmits culture and socialization. Education is functional in society as it creates an integration in society. It creates social placement, social control, social change, and it creates cultural innovation. So delving a little bit deeper into each one of those. So the first one, transmitting culture and socialization. This creates a concise and uniform idea of what we're supposed to know and learn, and it creates a level of harmony and consensus. So a functionalist loves harmony and loves consensus. So if you look at this picture, and you have all different types of scientific equipment, right? I'm sure most of y'all have seen most of these things. So if you look at the test tube, right, that's a test tube, and we've learned that that's a test tube. We've learned what a Bunsen burner is. But what if I said, all right, everybody, get out your flamethrowers? Maybe some of you would be like, maybe she means the Bunsen burner, right? There would be some scratching of the head, and what does she mean? What did she ask for? Right? That's not consensus, and that's not social harmony, right? If I said to you, you guys understand this, but if I say, okay, today's experiment, you need a Bunsen burner, you need a magnet, you need a stethoscope, and you need a level. That would be a bizarre experiment, but you know exactly what to get. That is how education transmits culturally relevant information, and this also socializes us, right? All right, integration. So integration is where children become accultured to the dominant culture. We know what acculturation means. We've gone through this. Integration is you go into school and you become accultured to the dominant culture that the educational system is teaching you. So everybody gets the same books. Everyone gets what's a Texas science book? Is it different than other types of science? But everybody at the school gets a Texas science book, a literature book, an algebra book, a Creating America book, and some form of Spanish or foreign language. Okay, so children then become assimilation agents to their extended family. A great example of this is immigrants to the U.S. So if you think about certain places in the U.S., the children that go in, they may be the only English speaker in their home, and the more that they learn English through school, the more they can teach their family at home. And this is an assimilation agent. They become an assimilation agent to the dominant culture, which is speaking English. The next is social placement. So this is an effort to place students on a placement trajectory. So someone determines the path of success for you. So who of y'all in high school or even middle school took one of those tests that says what you should be? Well, mine, I remember very vividly. It said I was supposed to be a marine biologist. And frankly, the only thing that I should be, that equates for me to be a marine biologist is I like to swim and I liked the beach during this time period, right? So what? A marine biologist? Probably not. But social placement, this is meant to place students on a placement trajectory. Oh, you like to talk a lot. Well, maybe you should be a lawyer or a teacher. Oh, you're really good at math. Well, maybe in physics, maybe you should be an engineer, right? So we take what people are good at, and someone in that school says, all right, you go on this little conveyor belt, and it should just send you right up to where you need to go, right? Well, how many of you guys at 18, and maybe some of you all are 18, are doing something in college that you change your mind a year later? So social placement, again, it's an effort to place someone on a trajectory. Sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. I, in case you're wondering, am not a marine biologist. So close, but not so close. All right, social control. Teaching about rules and values in society. So social control, a couple of examples that I can give you is in 6th grade, this was truly real. I was living in Texas at this time period. I was going to middle school, and we had a purity pledge. So we went to the gym, and this lady told us all about these sexually transmitted infections and how people got pregnant. And at the end, they handed us little pieces of paper and pencils, and we all got together, and it was like, I will not have sex before marriage, or I am planning to have sex before marriage. And they were essentially trying to get, and then you turn it in, right? And they're essentially trying to gauge who is going to do what before marriage or not marriage, right? So social control, they're teaching you this information to make sure you do or do not do something. So standing for the Pledge of Allegiance every morning, I did this from first grade, kindergarten, to the last grade I was in, 12th grade. So social control, if you did something wrong, you could get detention for it. And this is quite similar to if you do something wrong now, well, you go to jail. So detention, jail, there's going to be consequences for your actions. There's also good consequences for good actions. You study hard, you get really good grades, and you get an A in a class, or you get to be the valedictorian or salutatorian or something like that. So education also teaches us about social control. Social change. So education creates change, right? So we are constantly learning, we're constantly growing, we're constantly getting bigger and better and understanding things more. So education should advance us through different thought processes. A great example, desegregation. So along with education, people have learned that anybody should be able to sit next to anybody in school and learn, and that it doesn't matter what color you are, what your biological sex is, what your gender is, that shouldn't matter at all, because segregation is bad, right? We learn this through social change, and a lot of positive comes from education. Typically, good social change. Lastly, cultural innovation. So higher education creates opportunity of innovation by allowing people to participate in the advancement of knowledge. So we are a think tank, right? A university is a big think tank. And each time a new wave of student comes in, we should be learning and growing and advancing off of the knowledge that was learned beforehand. So education creates this cultural innovation to where we're constantly growing, getting better, getting new vaccines, understanding more about health and medicine and psychology and sociology and math and astronomy, right? This is a huge asset of education. So that was all a functionalist view of education, okay? So all of those 6 outlined things are what a functionalist believes is a part of the educational system. So now we're moving into the conflict perspective of education. So institutions tend to reinforce the status quo per a conflict perspective. Conflict perspectives say that the bad thing of institutions, so educational institutions, religious institutions, healthcare institutions, gender norm institutions, anything, they reinforce that status quo, which per a conflict perspective creates where some people get ahead and some people don't. So cultural perspective of education is that it promotes assimilation, which to that perspective, is a bad thing because it dilutes diversity. You lose people's culture when you're all going towards the main culture through assimilation. So if you think about the grading system, it doesn't matter how nice or how kind or how smart you are or how whatever you are, that if you score low on an exam, well, then that's going to reflect your worth, if you will, in the class, right? That your grade worth is reflected if you get an A to an F. Maybe you're like, I failed that class, I got an F. Well, wouldn't people typically say that means that you're not smart? Another thing within the conflict perspective of education is that English only in schools promotes assimilation to one dominant culture, and that's English-speaking people. Next, credentials. Credentialism, as we talked about, are scarce resources. Not everybody can get a master's. Not everybody can graduate from college. Not everyone can graduate even from high school. So and this is based upon not everybody starts off at the same place on the same starting line. And not everybody has equal ability and talents. And so conflict perspective would say that this reinforces that these scarce resources create more inequality, more gaps in income, more of a gap between men and women, more of a gap between different races and ethnicities. So public schools, talking about credentialism, public schools are not equal. This is quite well known because they're based off of property tax. So richer areas equal richer schools. Lastly, within the conflict perspective of education, the bestowing of status selectivity. So what that means to a conflict perspective is that standardized tests tend to reflect social class, not intelligence. So how many books that you grew up with in your home versus someone who didn't grow up with a lot of books in their home. There could be a difference in word availability within someone's mind or brain, just based solely off of the fact that maybe their parents didn't have enough money for books, or the lack of their parents did have enough money for books. So again, a conflict perspective says that merit does not equal success. So an interactionist insight of education states that the labeling theory within this is the micro perspective, labeling theory. So what is someone told about themselves based upon their education? So administrative expectations within labeling theory is that labels carry meaning to the point that they reflect the institution's actions that within the individual. So the self-fulfilling prophecy concept. So let me make that a little bit more clear. So the labeling theory is that if someone says, you are very smart, you have gotten all A's and you're in all AP classes, you are so smart. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Okay, well, I'm smart, so I'm going to be smart. I'm not smart, right? Also, on the different side of the same coin, is if someone says you're really not good at reading and you make really bad grades and you show up late to school and you don't have nice clothes on, you're not doing well. That person can internalize that I'm not good enough, I don't do enough, and I'm not smart. This self-fulfilling prophecy. So administrative expectations, that is a muddy way of saying that what the institution of education tells us, based upon the administration portion of education, what someone gets as far as A's, B's, C's, and D's, is a self-fulfilling prophecy based upon what people tell them about themselves and about their work. Self-fulfilling prophecy, as I just stated, that students are labeled as potentially did better, lived up to those expectations. So a story on that is there was a double-blind study that they took two different classrooms and they told each of the teachers, told one of the teachers, this is a classroom of kids who are so smart, like off the charts smart. So good luck with them. That teacher went in there, and it, again, meaning what I mean by this is that the students were just a conglomeration of students. They weren't all that smart. They were just students, right? Some of them, I'm sure, were smart, and some of them were just regular students. The other classroom, they told the teacher, this is a group of students who really struggle. They're like in remedial classes. Again, same cut of cloth of students, right? The class that the teacher knew that they was given information that they were smarter and better. That class did better than the class that was told that they were in a remedial course. So the point of this is that self-fulfilling prophecy is real. What you tell people and how you label people significantly determines how they interact with their world. Okay, school to prison pipeline. This is one of the last slides. So this is a really good graphic here. So from school to prison, so this is students of color typically face harsher discipline and more likely to be pushed out of school than their white counterparts. So 40% of students expelled from the U.S. schools each year are black. 70% of students involved in in-school arrests are black or Latino. There are 3.5 times more likely that a black student and 3.5 times more likely, or 3.5 more times likely to be suspended than a white student. Individuals who are black and Latino are twice as likely not to graduate from high school comparative to their white counterparts. And 68% of all males in state and federal prisons do not have a diploma from high school. So the point of this is this resurgence of information that's coming out that's saying that there is a pipeline between school and deviance within school and getting kicked out or being punished, and people that go to prison. So this leads us to the effects of educational inequality. So this is a good little wrap up. Look at the two pictures. So the top picture, that's a class full of students. It doesn't seem to be the nicest classroom. And then, so they have one teacher per a lot of different students in one classroom, versus the bottom picture where there is one teacher with fewer students, right? So not every person starts off at the same place in life. Schools are based heavily on property taxes. So if you live in a really nice area, that school is typically going to be nicer and have more resources. Standardized tests test taking skills rather than thinking skills. On average, the poorest school spends about 15% less per pupil than wealthier schools. And lastly, wealthy schools typically have guidance counselors, school psychologists, personal iPads or laptops, and up-to-date textbooks, where other schools, and in particular, I knew of a school in Oklahoma City that their history textbook still said that George W. Bush was president, and that's been a bit ago, right? So there is inequality in the U.S. education system. This is the takeaway of the slide that I want you all to take away from this particular lecture. I appreciate you guys hanging in there with me. This is right at about 26 minutes. So the last one was 30 minutes. This one is about 26 minutes. Our next one, which is on family and family diversity, will probably be at about the same. Thank you guys so much for hanging in there with me.